Yes, in this lecture we're going to explore the policy concepts which currently dominate the realm of environmental policy, both at national and international levels. These are namely sustainable development and the green economy. These terms, these concepts, this language can be found on the lips of politicians, in the corridors of governments and bureaucracies, and in the campaigning materials of civil society, as well as very often the annual reports of private companies. We're going to be profiling the definitions of these concepts. These are things you're going to be aware of, and then we're going to explore how they manifest themselves at the national and global levels. Finally, we're going to be turning to the adoption of such a language in the activities and documents of multinational corporations operating across the globe. So we're going to be drawing on the past couple of days, a number of comments and questions we've had to kind of really explore the role of companies and the role of green finance and green growth and the green economy in contemporary environmental policy. We're then going to explore how this can be challenged. It is important to remember that sustainable development remains a contested concept. It is ambiguous, it is fuzzy, it has no real universal meaning, and as a result, as I said yesterday, we all have different visions of what a sustainable future and sustainable development should be and what it looks like. We're going to explore some alternative sustainabilities and their transformative potential. These are primarily at the local community level, but they show us that there is a potential movement away from the dominance of sustainable development and the green economy. In the workshop after the break, we'll be discussing a number of these case studies, as well as drawing on our own experience to see how applicable these may be to different contexts. In our first lecture, I mentioned sustainable development as a dominant concept. You know about sustainable development. It is clear. We have had it in our faces and in our books for close to 30 years now, over 30 years now. One way of understanding sustainable development, which I'm sure you all know, is the three pillars, each of which is essential when we address global challenges. The social, related to human needs, values, relationships. The economic, primarily concerning the allocation of resources. And the environmental, addressing how the social and the economic impact upon the environment around us. Now think of the imagery of the pillars here. I'll be moving on quickly because this is something you know. But think of the imagery of the pillars, because they tell us that without one of the pillars, the roof is in danger of collapse. When the roof represents sustainability, we can see what this imbalance may mean when it comes to, for example, planetary boundaries. As a result, society and policy must seek to address these three pillars simultaneously. The aim of human needs is at the core of sustainable development. And just to clarify, the Brundtland report, which have you all read the Brundtland report? Our Common Future from 1987? Yeah? Okay, so it characterises needs as employment, food, energy, housing, water, sanitation, and healthcare, all as basic human needs. Furthermore, all of us, according to Brundtland, are entitled to aspire to more than just our basic needs. The report states on page 44, sustainable development requires meeting the basic needs of all and extending to all the opportunity to satisfy their aspirations for a better life. It is not just about fulfilling basic needs, it's about striving for a better life. This focus on needs and aspiration reflects the previous discussions which took place at the 1972 Stockholm Conference, where delegates from the Global South argued that they had a right to develop economically and alleviate poverty in their countries. We see this discourse and debate continuing. The needs in our common future, the needs in the Brundtland report, are particularly focused on the essential needs of the world's poor, to which overriding priority should be given, and that's a quote. Although meeting the needs of the population provides an integral part of the Brundtland definition, come on in, the need to economically develop has its limits. Now, the Brundtland definition locates its limits in terms of intergenerational justice. We must meet our needs of today without undermining the ability of future generations to meet their own. This is the key quote. This is what we remember of sustainable development. But it draws our attention to a new layer of our footprint on the globe, which is that the externalities of our behaviour do not just affect those around us, but they affect people who are not here yet. As Our Common Future puts it, we act as we do because we can get away with it. Future generations do not vote. They have no political or financial power. They cannot challenge our decisions. So as a result, sustainable development draws our attention to the need to think about the future, to understand that the earth that we live on, the world we inhabit, the resources that we use, being finite, will have supplementary impact on those who come after us. When we talk about sustainable development, we now talk more about the Sustainable Development Goals. These 17 global goals, agreed in 2015 and being part of a 2030 agenda for sustainable development. Now, these 15 goals encompass a total of 169 targets, so there's quite a lot for everyone to do in the next 11 years. And taken together, do embody the three pillars of sustainable development. Economic growth, social inclusion and environmental protection. As a result, they provide us with our most up-to-date framework from which to understand global challenges. Importantly, they start recognising, or they demonstrate the beginning of a recognition of a wider need for sustainability, a need for a wider sustainability, a holistic understanding. You've done all this, I'm sure. Anyone nodding their heads? No? Yes? Yes. So you know about it. You know how difficult they were to negotiate, how they are likely going to be very difficult to succeed and meet, but also how essential they have been to our current sustainable development regime. Now, efforts to transition away from our current system towards sustainable development have been very modest. A number of reasons have constrained any transition. Sustainable development policy has not necessarily achieved its focus on the three pillars equally. It is often argued that one of the key reasons for lack of significant progress has been the inability to clearly make the business case for investing in the environment. The environment is something we take from rather than we invest our time and finances in. It's currently thought that in order to encourage policy and decision makers to invest their time, their political capital and their finances into the environment, they need to be convinced that such actions will have economic benefits. These benefits can include additional jobs, increased output, creation of new market niches and new industries, increased trade, in short, a positive impact on gross domestic product or GDP. All of which lead to some form of fulfilment of the Sustainable Development Goals. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, very few are intrinsically linked to the environment. They are linked to how we interact, how we operate with it, what we take from it, and what it gives us, but also the potential risks associated. So it's therefore essential to demonstrate, when appealing to policymakers and politicians, that there is a clear relationship between investing in the environment, social, economic development, and the fulfilment of social needs. It's widely thought that human welfare, improving human welfare, should be the primary aim of any development strategy. Poverty eradication is key when how we approach economic issues. And we somehow need to ensure that the environment and environmental protection is linked to that overarching policy goal. The green economy can be viewed as an approach that emphasises these linkages. The United Nations Environment Programme, or UNEP, defines the green economy as one that results in improved well-being and social equity while significantly reducing environmental risks and ecological scarcities. I highlight which order those two aims come in that quote. They can be viewed as a tool or a vehicle that facilitates a transition to sustainable development. The green economy is an economy in which the vital linkages between economic development, social needs and the environment are taken into account, and in which the transformation of production processes and consumption patterns, linked to, say, reducing waste, reducing pollution, the more efficient use of resources, materials and energy, will revitalise and diversify economies. It is not just environmental protection for environmental protection's sake, it is environmental protection to create decent employment opportunities, promote sustainable trade, reduce poverty, and improve equity and income distribution. Sounds perfect, doesn't it? We go back to those three pillars, and the green economy aims to solve all three. The green economy argues, again, and this is going back to the ecological modernisation from Monday, argues that the environment should not be treated in isolation. It needs to be part of mainstream economic policy. By integrating the environment in macroeconomic policy has long been called for, going back as far as 1987, the Brundtland Commission. Efforts have been modest when it comes to achieving this goal. We still see this debate between economic competitiveness and environmental protection. In most instances, the environment continues to be addressed as a separate component. Environmental regulators and environmental ministries stand alone. They concern more niche issues in the population's understanding. We were talking yesterday about how low climate change and the environment come in polls of populations when they're discussing what their main priorities are, what their main concerns are. It remains an issue which is detached. But everything we do has an impact on the environment, and everything we do is at risk of climate change. The food that we buy, the water that we drink, the goods we consume are all entwined within the environment and as a result within environmental issues. Now, the green economy supposedly advocates the adoption of a more integrated policy making. Rather than focusing on different spheres and different pillars, it adopts a wider approach which, rather than focusing on particular environmental problems, focuses on ecosystems, for example, or trading patterns and supply chains, which enables a better understanding and appreciation of the fact that the different elements of our interaction in the environment function as part of an integrated whole. The green economy also represents a recognition that although climate change policy may result in short-term costs, quite large costs, they may in due course stimulate new low-carbon industries, create jobs and lead to more resource-efficient, shock-resistant and competitive economies. Okay, now countries that are currently explicitly couching their climate change policy as green growth strategies include Ethiopia, Rwanda and South Korea. The Green New Deal, which is picking up traction in the United States and the UK currently, is another example of this green economy. The fact that massive state investment in the environmental sector will not only solve an issue of climate change, supposedly, but also create jobs and improve well-being of the population, is becoming a particularly important part of how we discuss environmental policy currently. And this is not linked to be it left or right on the political spectrum. It's gaining traction from numerous different political parties. The conventional rationale is that in harnessing financial, technological and organisational resources, society can develop an effective response to climate change. Now, it will be no surprise to you after everything I've just said in the past 15 minutes that this green economy approach, this green growth approach, calls for an increased action and increased focus on the private sector, of business, of commercial enterprise. It goes to the companies of our world, global, national, state-owned, private, and positions these entities as key actors within environmental policy. Now, since the 1980s or the 1990s, there have been numerous interrelated and complementary concepts that have been proposed to encourage industry to become more sustainable whilst maintaining their economic competitiveness. And I'm sure that you've come across some of these or all of these. Yeah? Industrial ecology, mapping the kind of like energy flows and material flows through the life cycle of products. Interestingly, that's continuing, particularly when it comes to ICT, so computing, is tracing the energy flows of, say, for example, using YouTube, which is something I'll be doing in a minute, of mobile phone networks, because it's not just charging your phone, which is the energy being used, it's the academics and researchers tracing the energy flows linked to mobile phone use, particularly in the UK. Ecological modernisation, we've been there, done that. Triple bottom line, a framework of accounting which encourages the balancing of social, environmental and economic outcomes. Cradle-to-cradle design, the minimisation of waste when it comes to producing a project or a service. And now the circular economy, an approach focused on ensuring long-lasting design, maintenance and repair and reuse, recycling or refurbishing. Julian Kirscher, who contributed to a recent paper exploring the circular economy, this paper, the Kirscher et al. Paper in 2017, has detected how many different definitions there are of a circular economy, and there's over 100 different definitions. Of course, they proposed their own definition as well, to not only add to the number, but also to hopefully bring everything together. So together these concepts contribute to a worldview that business managers, that CEOs, need to be economically incentivized to innovate towards sustainability. When it comes to the bottom line, there needs to be clear benefits of acting in an environmentally friendly, environmentally positive way. In the private sector, many of the world's largest companies have readily adopted such worldviews. This is proving to be somewhat successful. They promise to promote goals such as environmental sustainability, well-being and social equity in their supply chains through their core business activities. This is always evident in their annual reports, with full support being given by shareholders at annual general meetings. Significant companies in the United States which have kind of subscribed to this green economy view include Chevron, ExxonMobil and Microsoft, all of which have demonstrated this worldview within their 2015 annual reports and from onwards. Now, although the role of corporations in climate change policy and environmental policy is controversial in more academic or political discussions, their presence in environmental policy is currently assured. You might not like the idea, I might not like the idea, but the private sector is becoming entrenched within environmental policy. They are a key actor. Measures to address competitiveness impacts are increasingly incorporated into environmental policy making and implementation, as we saw yesterday, because of this fear of a race to the bottom in pollution havens. In doing so, national policymakers are subscribing to the views of a number of CEOs that not all regulation will be beneficial, that there needs to be a balance between the environment and the economy. And yesterday I wanted to take you on a tour of a particular pollution haven of Goyu in China, and I've got a video now, so I'm going to quickly do that just to loop round. This is a group of American journalists in Goyu in what year? 2008, I think. 2008, and they have a walk around. So
this is an entire village of electronic components. It's the most amazing thing. And the scary thing is what they do here is they burn it to get a little bit of copper out, and the value of copper has been skyrocketing. So this type of trade has really taken off. But it's a very dirty job they're doing. Here's a computer case from Sun Microsystems. There's an old Apple Mac. Here's an old Apple 5.25-inch disk drive. Some of this stuff's exactly old and obsolete. You know, when you burn this stuff, I wonder what gets released into the air. Oh, what you're going to create is much worse than the toxic material that you start out with, which is already toxic enough. It is a problem to get rid of, and it takes a real cost to manage that problem. And getting rid of it in China is a whole lot cheaper than disposing of it in the United States. Exactly. This stuff is piled up higher than our heads. Yeah. There's so much plastic going to be burned, it's going to create very toxic material. All this plastic has bromine to create flame retardants. And when you burn that material, when you try to combust it, you create dioxin. The EPA has actually done studies in the laboratory to show what would happen if you burn this stuff in the open, like they're doing here, and it's down to the highest levels of dioxin ever produced. And dioxin does what? Cancer. Cancer. For humans, for animals, very toxic. Humans are looking at long-term effects.
So there's this concern continuing that too much regulation may lead to a race to the bottom, to the creation of more pollution havens which circumvent international regulations and lead to pollution elsewhere. In placing business at the forefront of environmental policy, the hope is that we can avoid such an issue, such a limitation, such a consequence of environmental policy. In some quarters, there are growing demands for governments to do more to regulate industries and corporations, to promote deep reductions in emissions and foster rapid changes in how they conduct their business and their business culture. However, although there is a growing call for change, and we'll be talking about that in a bit, business is still being looked to forward economic growth and meet the rising demand of consumer goods and services worldwide. And as a result, they maintain a key role in the social, the economic, and the environmental pillars of sustainable development. Now, why corporations? No. Corporations' role in GHG emissions is a key way of understanding the importance of business. So in 2010, 82% of the global 500 companies voluntarily reported their carbon emissions, which in total amounted to around 3.4 billion tonnes of CO2 equivalent, and represented around 11% of total global emissions in 2010. It puts my 12.4 tonnes from the other day in perspective, doesn't it? In 2017, a report by an organisation called Carbon Majors found that just 100 companies have been the source of more than 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions since 1988. 25 of that 100, so 25 corporate and state-producing entities accounted for 51% of global industrial GHG emissions. So this isn't just business as a whole. This isn't just the supermarket down the road. These companies, so these are their GHG emissions. And this is a list of the 25 entities responsible for 51% of global industrial GHG emissions. Chinese coal, National Iranian Oil, Saudi Aramco, Gazprom, ExxonMobil, BP, Chevron. There's something which joins them all together, isn't there? Now, what I find particularly interesting here, and it loops back to what we've been discussing in recent days, is the importance of the state. Because of these emissions, 32% of these 25 entities are public investor-owned, 9% are privately owned, and 59% are state-owned, or state-controlled, or state-managed, or part of a state apparatus. Yeah, in terms of organisations such as Petrobras, which is a petroleum company in Brazil, it's been heavily linked to the state. It's been state-run for a number of years, but it's slowly being privatised. But it still remains a key part of state economic activity. And all you have to do is look through these names and you can see how important the states are, because when I remove state-controlled entities, we end up with 9. And those companies are 9 of the most powerful companies in the world. The highest emitting companies since 1988 that are investor-owned include ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, Chevron, Peabody, Total, BHP Billiton. These are global extraction companies. They operate in nearly every country in the world and sell their product in nearly every country in the world. So they represent a fifth of global industrial GHG emissions. This scale of their emissions signals the importance and potential for investor engagement in the fossil fuel industry. Okay, state-owned entities are hugely important. But when we think about how we're focusing on the private sector, we can see from this the importance of investor action. As a result, there is a well-grounded focus on encouraging environmentalist or green investment, with efforts to focus investors' attention on companies and sectors that are deemed clean. It's not just about encouraging governments that there is a benefit of environmental action, but also demonstrating to investors how environmental investment, green investment, can be profitable, as well as good and ethical. This is evident in the widespread divestment movement, which some of you may be part of, or at least have sympathy with. For those of you who don't know what divestment is, it is the opposite of investment. It simply means getting rid of stocks, bonds, or investment funds that are unethical or morally ambiguous. Okay, so in light of our growing awareness of climate change, global campaigns are asking institutions to immediately freeze any new investment in fossil fuel companies and to divest any funds that they have. They include fossil fuel public equities and corporate bonds within 5 years, and also to end all sponsorship by fossil fuel companies. So this may be, for example, a museum in London which has an exhibition hall sponsored by Shell. Why give Shell that time and space when their economic activity is leading to climate change? Okay, so this is based on similar campaign tactics which were used against tobacco advertising, for example. It's very similar to like a boycott movement, but it's much more targeted to the financial agents and the shareholders. It's targeting investor practices. As of last year, as of 2018, Fossil Free, which is a global movement for divestment, reported that over 991 institutions had divested $7.19 trillion US from fossil fuel companies. And over 58,000 individuals, such as you and I, had divested over 5.2 billion. The 991 institutions include, interestingly, the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is the biggest national sovereign wealth fund in the world. The irony of that is that that wealth fund was primarily based on Norway's own oil extraction. Other initiatives from the marine industry include the CERES project. This is CERES, which mobilises a network of investors, companies and public interest groups to expand the adoption of sustainable business practices. Its 2014 report is a really good read, and I'm going to try and get that to you to read in your own time. It's not obligatory. You will not see me after today, so it does not matter. But if you want to know what happens when it comes to commercial companies grouping together to put together shareholder action, it's an interesting read. In short, it evaluates how well 613 of the largest publicly traded US companies are integrating sustainability into their business systems and decision making. It provides almost an encyclopedia of companies in the US for investors to target or not target when it comes to investment. And there's some fascinating findings in there related to how certain companies are using circular economy tactics, for example, within their supply chains, how they are approaching issues of water scarcity, and I'll make sure that it's made available to you all. Now, this is clearly linked to the concept of corporate social responsibility, which I'm sure has been said in these lecture halls numerous times for you all. Is that right? Yeah. Which in many ways is based around notions of sustainable development, simultaneously paying attention to social, economic and environmental requirements and needs and impacts, rather than just looking exclusively at economic aspects. CSR is supposed to give companies an increased motivation to explore additional options in their behaviour and then report back. The main drivers behind the expansion of CSR activities can be found in growing pressure from civil society actors, NGOs, but also citizen groups who monitor and expose non-compliance with environmental norms, environmental laws, as well as polluting behaviour. Civil society actors have become very adept and skilled at holding companies responsible for social and environmental consequences, impacts, responsible for their actions. Now, CSR, in my mind, should be seen as a means of accommodating these pressures, of marginalising more radical voices of critique, of reducing a threat of regulation, and constructing a company as a moral agent, seeking a social licence, community acceptance, or further legitimacy. It does this by taking into account the demands and expectations that emerge from their shareholders as shareholders become more aware of the impact of the industrial commercial activity associated with the company. I'm going to quickly play you a video of the CEO of Unilever talking about how responsible their business is.
Years back, you set the target for your managers to reduce their carbon footprint by 50% in a pretty quick period of time. I mean, why did you do that?
What we said as Unilever was, if we want to be accepted longer term as a company, totally in sync, by the way, was also dealing with our shareholders, was not obsessively focused on shareholders alone. There are multi-stakeholders you have to take care of. We have to have a business model where you can no longer take from society because we're over-consuming. You know, we have lifted enormous amounts of people out of poverty, 500 million just over the last 2 to 3 decades alone. So capitalism has worked to some extent, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here either. But at the same time, there are still 1 billion people going to bed hungry. We haven't figured out how to do it without over-consumerism, using too many of the world's scarce resources, enormous amount of government debt or public debt. So we all agree that we need to evolve our business model. So what we said at Unilever was, how can we double our turnover? Because the world is ample of opportunities. Still 2 billion people have to come into this world with these emerging markets growing very healthy rates. So, but how can we do this? By totally decoupling our growth from the environmental impact, and how can we maximize our social impact? We set some overarching targets, we set some individual targets. We look at the total value chain, and a part of that is this total decoupling. So you mentioned carbon, which is one part of it. Another part is, for example, 100% sustainably sourced agricultural materials. On the carbon itself, our business has grown 30% over the last 4 years, so very healthy. But our carbon footprint by ourselves has come down by about 35%. And we've done that by running factories on biomass, by changing the way we use it. The issue is not actually how most companies do it in your own factories or your own travel. The issue is actually taking responsibility of the total supply chain. 25 to 30% of our carbon is actually in the agricultural side. So that's why we focus on sustainable agriculture. And carbon emission is part of that. Soil management, fertilizing, all these things that you're well aware of. And then for us, actually 70% of the carbon footprint is in the consumer's home. So how can we get households to take shorter showers, to wash their hands, in a responsible way, use less water and all that. So we work a lot on that change of consumer behavior. And there, obviously, it is a little bit more difficult and takes a little bit longer. And then we use the scale and size of companies like ours, to finish the story, to do some market transformation. For example, how can you move all the ice cream cabinets or fresh cream coolers, etc., to natural refrigerants? That's 3 to 4% of global warming. How can you get out of illegal deforestation? That's 17% of global warming. So where I spend a lot of time is creating these global coalitions to really make these step changes.
Did you notice how easy it was for him to reel off all of the facts about how they were reducing their footprint? But did you notice how he started, within 5 words, he mentioned the word shareholders? Unilever's CSR agenda, in part, stemmed from both public pressure and awareness of the management of the impacts that their activity had, particularly demonstrated around deforestation and palm oil in the current day, and shareholder pressure, the shareholder engagement in the environmental issues. Now, there are other companies who embrace environmentalism as a core part of their set of values. For example, Patagonia is an American company specializing in outdoor apparel. Many of the people who work for Patagonia as a result are climbers, skiers, surfers, hikers. In short, if the environment is destroyed, if habitats are destroyed, there will be no place for Patagonia's customers or employees to go and use these clothes. For over 30 years, Patagonia has donated 1% of their annual sales to environmental charities and grassroots organisations. In 2010, they helped found a Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which is an alliance of 30 companies from the clothing and footwear industries looking to improve best practice within the sector. But perhaps the most high profile of Patagonia's initiatives has been a series of adverts insisting that consumers do not buy their clothing. These subversive ads were placed to coincide with Black Friday, the annual consumer buying frenzy in the United States, which is slowly creeping into the UK and Western Europe. and they created quite a stir. I will be honest, we do not know how many jackets Patagonia sold in that sale, but I imagine it was more than average. What we see here is not just environmentalist values being a core part of a company's mission and activity, but also the use of environmentalist language and notions and the same values to generate business. So you will, but this is an advertising campaign. And the aim of an advertising campaign is usually the same no matter where or who. Now, what we've spoken about a lot in recent years is the importance of the bottom line and the potential of framing environmental issues in an economic language to gain legitimacy and support. Whilst industry leaders, such as Patagonia and Unilever, proactively address environmental issues as an integrated part of corporate strategy, other businesses, in particular small and medium businesses, perceive it as a means of cost reduction. This speaks to something called the Porter hypothesis, which in short argues that more stringent environmental policies should trigger greater investment in developing new pollution-saving technologies. If new environmentally friendly technologies induce savings in resource use, in water use, in energy use, that would not have occurred without a policy, they may offset the compliance costs in the long term. So there's an example of a jewellery factory in the northwest United States, I can't remember which state, which, due to regulation, had to install new water connections when it came to cleaning the stones used in jewellery, the diamonds used in jewellery. That is a very water-intensive process, because I'm sure you can imagine to clean up a diamond takes water at a great pressure. The installation of the new technology cost a fair bit of money. There was an outlay and an investment in installing this new technology. However, it made the process of cleaning the jewellery both more efficient in terms of water usage and time. The company, the factory, became more efficient and more profitable. If regulations give rise to innovation that has benefits that in turn outweigh the costs of wider compliance with environmental regulation in the first place, small and medium businesses will likely be inclined to engage in investment. So a recent survey by the Environmental Defence Fund has found, they surveyed about 500 high-profile business executives. And it found that changing technology innovations were empowering private sector leaders to improve their business and environmental performance and to accelerate sustainability efforts across global supply chains. So in short, new technologies, innovation technologies, don't just lead to greater environmental outcomes in the eyes of business leaders. They also provide important parts of for their business moving forward. Doesn't just improve environmental performance, but also business performance as well. So again, it's not just about the environmental impacts and improvements of activity, but also the bottom line as well. It's the key part of the green economy, of green growth strategies. To provide an example, I'm going to talk about Walmart, and in particular their project Gigaton, which is part of a 13-year partnership between Walmart and the Environmental Defence Fund that has explored various ways to upgrade the supply chain. Now, just to put Walmart into perspective, it is one of the world's biggest employers. At its height, there were only 2 or 3 employers who employed more people. One of them was the railway service in India, and the other was, I think, the Chinese Security Service or something along those lines. This is a huge company. And it is aimed to reduce its total emissions by 1 gigaton in the process of its plan. It focuses on 5 key areas of Walmart's supply chain. Agriculture, working with farmers to increase efficiency of fertilizer use. Product design and use, exploring the synergies between cost-effective and emission-decreasing practices to reduce the pollution of the products. Food waste, the reduction of on-farm food waste. Freight and transport, using more streamlined networks, cleaner fuels, and switching from road to rail. Deforestation as well, lastly. Identifying points in the supply chain, particularly those linked to beef farming and soybean farming, that lead to deforestation. Now, to put this in perspective again, this scheme is potentially leading to the engagement between Walmart and 100,000 suppliers. They can be mandated by Walmart to make commitments to decrease their supply chain emission. So at a meeting last year, in April last year, 2018, Walmart announced 20 million metric tonnes of GHG emissions reductions from their suppliers. 400 suppliers with operations in more than 30 countries have now joined Project Gigaton and are setting ambitious climate targets. Now, this raises questions about the importance of supply chains in decreasing emissions. Carbon emissions in supply chains are on average 4 times bigger than the carbon emissions linked to the company's direct operations at fixed sites. Freight accounts for 16% of the total emissions of the US corporate sector. The shipping of goods from place to place accounts for quite a sizable chunk of GHG emissions. Now, with the global population projected to swell to over 9 billion by 2050, there's an opportunity for business to expand its operations and to serve more people, but also an opportunity to change its business practices as it expands in order to protect the environment. There's an argument that up and down the supply chain, business as usual is not just hurting the environment, but it's hurting the bottom line as well. Because if inefficiencies in business continue as the company grows, it's highly likely to lead to financial losses. So, big retailers and consumer products have big retailers and consumer products companies such as Walmart have a real power in the green economy. They have a real leverage to change how things are done. When they speak, their suppliers respond. If they commit to sell products made in sustainable ways or with sustainable ingredients, then everyone in the supply chain, from farmers and chemical producers to agribusinesses and distributors, will take action to make the end product safer and more sustainable. So earlier this year, Unilever announced that it was going to release all the details of its palm oil supply chain, becoming the first major country to do so. And in doing so, they've released the locations of more than 1,400 processing facilities and 300 direct suppliers of palm oil. It's hoped that it would spark an industry-wide movement towards supply chain transparency, not necessarily happening yet, but it has raised public consciousness of the importance of palm oil when protecting the forests. Well, the importance of rolling back palm oil expansion forests and the incredible damage that this activity can have. And I'm not going to give you more Unilever, which is where this guy's from, because you've had Unilever tell us all the facts already. But I'm going to show you an advert for Iceland, which is a British supermarket, which followed Unilever's lead late last year and pledged that it would only stock sustainably sourced palm oil products. And I'm going to play it now. It's a Christmas advert, and I don't know how many of you have been to the UK or spent time in the UK, but Christmas adverts are highly important cultural moments in the United Kingdom. Don't ask me why, don't ask me since when, but they create almost political events, and I'll explain the effect that this had afterwards.
Can you make it louder?
Of course I can. Is that volume?
Yeah.
Yeah? No?
Yeah.
You can increase the volume in YouTube.
Okay. Yes, I can. Yeah?
Rantan in my...
Too loud? Loud enough?
It's okay.
Good.
There's a rantan in my bedroom and I don't know what to do. She plays with all my teddies and keeps borrowing my shoe. She destroys all of my houseplants and she keeps on shouting, ooh. She throws away my chocolate and she howls at my shampoo. There's a rantan in my bedroom and I don't want her to stay. So I told the naughty rantan that she had to go away. A rantan in my bedroom, just before you go, why were you in my bedroom? I really want to know. There's a human in my forest and I don't know what to do. He destroyed all of our trees with your food and shampoo. There's a human in my forest and I don't know what to do. He took away my mother and I'm scared he'll take me too. There are humans in my forest and I don't know what to do. They're burning it for palm oil. So I thought I'd stay with you. Oh, rantan in my bedroom, now I do know what to do. I'll fight to save your home and I'll stop you feeling blue. I'll share your story far and wide so others can fight too. Oh, rantan in my bedroom, I swear it on the stars. The future's not yet written, but I'll make sure it is ours. There's a
I won't make you watch it again. So this was an advert which was was due to air over Christmas Day in the UK. I don't know what happens in other countries for Christmas, but we mainly sit in front of a TV, eat chocolate and drink. And so as a result, any Christmas advert is very important. This never made it to Christmas Day. It was never aired on national television. It was forbidden by the TV regulator Ofcom because it was deemed too political. It was an Iceland advert produced in accordance with Greenpeace, the campaigning NGO, detailing the effects that palm oil have and announcing that Iceland was going sustainable palm oil in terms of the products that it sold. However, it raised consciousness of the impact that palm oil has. It raised a national discussion, and now everyone knows where to buy sustainably sourced palm oil products from, and Iceland appears to be doing quite well out of it. What this shows here is not just a company making a decision to source its products more sustainably, but also announcing it on the public stage. It becomes a key part of its values and its identities in the public arena. Unilever, Iceland, there are numerous companies which are putting the environment at the core of what they do, and this is generally good. But it comes with a health warning, and that health warning is particularly related to greenwash. Have you come across this term before? Yeah? Yeah? Greenwash is, in practice, the implementation of sustainability principles which might be deceptive. Examples of sustainability best practice can sometimes be counterbalanced by underwhelming performance and this deceptive behaviour. Greenwash is a communication that misleads people into forming overly positive beliefs about an organisation's environmental practices or products. To paraphrase something called the greenwashing index, it is greenwashing when a company or organisation spends more time or money pretending to be green, claiming to be green, than actually implementing business practices that minimise their environmental impact. And to give an example, and this is quite blatant, is Burberry, the British clothing company. It's sometimes blatant greenwashing. In their 2017 corporate social responsibility report, Burberry discussed a number of breakthroughs that they had made in terms of sustainability of their supply chain. They were sourcing sustainably grown cotton. They were paying their people in their supply chain a better wage. The next year, it was leaked that Burberry, the upmarket fashion label, destroyed unsold clothes, accessories and perfume worth over 28 million to protect this brand. It took the total of goods destroyed by Burberry over the past 5 years to 90 million in value. This is greenwash. It's weird in many ways. It strikes me as quite evil in a number of ways as well. But it demonstrates how companies pick and choose in their corporate social responsibility agendas. They highlight their gains, they highlight their efficiency, they highlight their victories. They do not necessarily see the burning of clothes as waste, because it's done to protect their brand. What we see here is not the environment being included in Burberry's bottom line and its branding, but being subsidiary to it. Sometimes it's more subtle, more insidious, until they're found out. And I want to highlight this with a Volkswagen campaign based around diesel cars, if I can.
How do you like my new car? Isn't diesel dirty?
I'll say it's beautiful, for Christ's sake.
I think it's beautiful, but aren't diesels dirty?
Yeah, that's true.
Oh, that used to be dirty. This is 2015.
No. Listen to me, Terry. Diesel in Latin means dirty.
I'll prove it to you.
Give her the wrong you got. Oh, look what she's doing.
See how clean it is?
It's not dirty, but you still have a dirty mind.
I do not. Yes, you do.
So this was an advertising campaign led by Volkswagen, 2015, which argued that their diesel cars were clean, low-emitting vehicles. This is part of a much wider campaign led by this company. And who could tell me what happened that same year?
The emission scandal?
Dieselgate. It was found that Volkswagen had rigged 11 million of its diesel cars with defeat devices, which is technology used to cheat official emissions tests led by a regulator. So the emissions scandal prompted the Obama administration in the US to recall nearly 500,000 cars, including a model of VW's luxury brand, another brand, Audi, which is ironically carrying the tagline, "Truth in Engineering" in the United States at the time. The scandal also led Volkswagen to abruptly pull its old wives' tales ads off the air. And it's still providing an important touchstone in environmental policy, because it shows how, although a company may adopt sustainable imagery and values within its branding, it's not necessarily the case. It may be greenwash. maybe a subtle form of greenwash until it's found out. But there's still an element of, well, untruth. So moving on from greenwash and making a quick... Oh, any questions? Yes.
Does reporting this proven? Is it proven? Like, does it work? Because I think that the biggest part of it is that medium and small size enterprises will invest in innovation, but because of their small size, they can just do not have enough money to invest.
I'll give you two answers. First, has been proven, not on a wholesale basis, no. In different empirical cases, yes. So the hypothesis might not be directly translated from one national context, one commercial context into another. It may work better in some sectors, for example, than others. In response to your second question, I give you a question as well. What policy mechanism can we use to help small and medium businesses have the capital available to invest in these changes? It's not just about getting them to do it. How can we help them do it as well? Subsidies, yeah? So we see here it's coming together. Like, it's not just about using this hypothesis, this model to say, if we bring in this regulation, we will, this will happen. It's ensuring that the policy is supported by other forms of other instruments and other incentives at play. Yeah. But it's very good questions. Thank you for asking it. Any other questions for me? Yeah.
I have a question about definitions. You told us about green economy, but during our classes we've heard about energy efficiency economy, ecological economy, and many other economies which are concerned about nature and connected with this theme. So, talk us about the definitions. What's the difference between green economy and energy efficiency economy, green economy and ecological economy?
The green economy is the most popular in policy currently. That's why I'm presenting it to you today. Yeah, there's always different viewpoints and worldviews of how we can take things forward and what our economy should look like. And when we explore sustainable development, when we explore current policy reports, it is the green economy which is dictating the majority of the policies. So that's why I'm talking about it today rather than the other alternative economies. I will be talking about alternatives after the break and kind of highlighting different routes forwards and more kind of transformative routes forward. But yeah, why am I talking about the green economy? How do I define the difference between it and others? This is the paradigm, this is the key route forward in policy. Whether we like that or not is something we can discuss in the next class. Yeah? So this question about subsidies is a nice kind of lead for me to talk about the importance of state and institutional support. So the environmental goods and services industry is growing fast, particularly in the OECD, but also in non-member countries. Think about recycled goods and products, but also more sustainable products, sustainably sourced products. So like environmental technologies a few decades ago, the introduction of computing into sectors, I'm firmly of the opinion that environmental goods and services can enhance the competitiveness of other industries and lead to their development and engagement within wider environmental issues. This explains, it can be explained by how a number of OECD governments see environmentally friendly innovation or eco-innovation as a major driver for green growth and current development strategies. I spoke about South Korea. I mentioned South Korea, but to give you an example of what they're doing, the government of South Korea has previously provided tax incentives for energy efficiency investments for the replacement of old industrial kilns in industry, the installation of energy-saving facilities, both within homes and commercial and industrial premises, and the installation of alternative fuel-using facilities. This has led to a reduction of energy consumption by 10%. But it has also stimulated the South Korean industries and companies engaged with this design, manufacture, and installation of the new technology. Furthermore, South Korean housing policies and programs are supporting the development of buildings and homes with state-of-the-art energy-efficient appliances and systems. So the state is directly acting to ensure that new homes being built are as energy efficient as they could be. These range from intelligent refrigerators to smart waste recycling systems and organic recycling systems as well. And again, there's a continued focus on the bottom line as a framing device and how we understand these things. Not only do we see that the Porter hypothesis, when you think about the long-term benefits, economic benefits, as opposed to a short-term cost, we only see financial benefits and innovation being claimed. We also see increasing claims of what the cost of business as usual can be. We see this in a carbon tracker study from 2015, which focused on the fossil fuel industry. And bear in mind how many of those 25 companies I showed you earlier were based in fossil fuel, the fossil fuel sector. It argued that fossil fuel companies risked wasting over $2 trillion over the coming decades by continuing to pursue coal, oil and gas products that could be much better spent in advances on renewables. The key with this wasn't just the fact that it made this calculation, it was that it was publicly distributed and made available to shareholders, communicating the fact that there were substantial threats to potential investor returns and that there was an economic cost to continuing as we are. Recent research has also found that for every degree Fahrenheit, not Celsius, to clarify here, the global temperatures rise, the US could lose around 0.7% of its total GDP, its annual GDP, sorry. This is primarily due to impacts of climate change, okay? This is due to temperature rise, increased or decreased rainfall, and increased severity of storms. Now, an increasingly popular way to incentivize pro-environmental behaviour is known as ecosystem services and payment for ecosystem services. And this is a key pillar on which current British, or English in particular, environmental policy sits. Ecosystem services are... Have you done ecosystem services? Yeah, cool. Can anyone tell me what they are? It's okay if you can't.
Ecosystem.
What are ecosystem services?
Examples?
Just, yeah.
For example, clean air.
Yeah.
The forest provides us with ecosystem services. For example, it sequesters CO2 emissions, it cleans air, it prevents soil erosion. Many examples.
Water regulation.
Yeah?
Aesthetic use.
Yes, it's this holistic understanding. Okay?
However, it is very difficult to evaluate them.
It is.
And to put a price.
Yeah. Bob Costanza has tried. But yeah, it's very difficult to put the price on. So the ecosystem services can be understood as being grouped into 4 broad categories. This is drawing from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. Provisioning, such as the production of food and water. Regulating, the control of climate and disease. Supporting, such as nutrient cycles and oxygen production. And cultural, so this recreational, this aesthetic, this spiritual links to the land. So to help inform decision makers, more and more ecosystems are being assigned economic values. This is proving highly difficult, complex, but also quite contested in the fact that how can we apply a financial value to something cultural or spiritual, for example? What is the value of a good view, of something that is aesthetically pleasing? Nevertheless, Bob Costanza et al. In 2014 aggregated global ecosystem services at around 125 to 145 trillion US dollars per year. I'm going to give some examples. We've already had some, but just going to rush through them. This is Bristol, by the way. This is a park near I work. Urban trees. Urban trees provide provisioning services. So they provide benefits such as food or timber. Regulating services, providing flood protection or the sequestration of carbon. Cultural services, public amenity and opportunities for recreation. And supporting services. They provide assistance in soil formation as well as biodiversity and habitats for wildlife. The current argument is that by paying companies and individuals to protect landscapes and ecosystems for the services that they provide, actors will now have a much greater incentive to ensure environmental protection and non-polluting behaviour. So, ecosystem services often lead to the provision of conditional incentives offered to farmers or landowners in exchanging for managing their land to provide some sort of ecological service. And to give an example, I want to talk about the water company Vittel in France. So in 1980s, Vittel was facing major issues involving the pollution of its aquifer, of its groundwater from which it drew its water. Local farmers had recently intensified their agricultural activity in the area and had been using intense amounts of pesticides and herbicides, the effluent of which had been flowing into the groundwater used by Vittel. So in short, farmers in the local area were over-polluting and polluting the water reserves used by the company. This was not great news. Vittel prides itself as natural mineral water, and to do so has had to meet certain laws, certain regulations, certain guidelines. So to counter this problem, and bear in mind this is the 1980s, so it's quite ahead of its time, Vittel developed a package of conditional incentives for local farmers to improve their practice and to decrease the pollution in the area. They paid subsidies to local farmers to enhance how they managed their land, to reforest catchment areas and to reduce their use of chemicals in the area. And Vittel you can still buy in shops as natural mineral water. There are numerous other examples at the moment of ecosystem services policies. Costa Rica is a fascinating and dominant example. Bolivia, the United States, Mexico, Honduras, Uganda, and as I said, is very important for contemporary agricultural and environmental policy in the UK. In the UK, upland areas are recognised for their outstanding beauty, one ecosystem service, but they also provide extensive additional supporting services. They provide food and fibre, carbon storage, and the provision of drinking water and recreation. Farmland across the globe is similar. We think of farmland as predominantly providing us with food, but ecosystem services provided include reforestation and raw materials, genetic resources, water, energy, think of biofuels here, pollination, quite important, carbon storage, climate regulation, waste decomposition, recreation, science and education, And then also therapeutic cultural services as well. So this is where we're coming to now. We're coming to a point when environmental policy is moving away from the polluter pays, the end of pipe control that I discussed in the first day, and going towards this payment for protection. The protector gets, provider gets. Rather than just focusing on having an intrinsic care for the environment, we're financialising it. We're providing it with an economic value and we're caring more about the bottom line.